Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm not seeing him on the screen here, list of videos. Ah, there we go. Live play-by-play. Ah, there we go. Live.
Okay. Right there.
The radical fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, everybody, welcome to our show. As regular listeners, viewers to the show know, the ones I have a private hangout. Jonathan, could you mute your side, because we're getting noises of you walking.
I'm just getting in the elevator. I'll be joining you momentarily, Yaron. Happy to be with you.
Okay, just mute. There you go. Thanks everybody for joining. So I do monthly. I do a hangout with some of my my most valued supporters, those who support the show at $100 or more. And let's see, we have, I think Darius is trying to join, and for some reason is having a hard time logging in, because I think that blank screen is him. I can't see you, can't hear you, Darius, and I don't know if that's you. But we've got Jim, we've got Jennifer. I think we've got Jonathan. He's kind of frozen on my screen. I'm not sure if he's still. He's going up an elevator. He says he might lose us and log back in a minute. All right. So the way these hangouts work is I get asked questions. We have a little bit of an exchange. Jonathan just bumped off. Hopefully he'll be back. And we have a bit of an exchange, and we take questions for about the first half an hour or more. And then if there's some interesting super chat questions or uninteresting super chat questions, as the case may be, we take those. So, all right, so let's get started. And Jennifer, we'll let you get started with if you have a question.
Think there's any validity to the argument that Latin America may not have done as well as Canada, the United States have done because they stayed Catholic more than Protestant?
So is there any validity to the idea that Catholicism kind of suppresses economic success? And it's not even just Latin America. If you look at Europe, Southern Europe, which is more Catholic, is poorer than Northern Europe, which is more Protestant. Parts of Eastern Europe, which are more Catholic, like Poland, historically have been not as westernized as Protestant West, I guess. So there probably is a case to be made that there's something there. I think that Catholicism, while being more intellectual than Protestantism, so Catholics are more intellectual, they're more philosophical. And therefore, they also take their ideas more seriously. And as a consequence, I think that they are much more opposed to self-interest, to the pursuit of profit. It took the Catholic Church until the late 1800s to say usury was okay. Usury meaning interest, any kind of interest. So banking was sinful all the way through the 19th century, even though, the church itself would issue loans, but they didn't like competition, I guess. So it certainly is the case that that I think Catholics took religion more seriously. So Luther and Calvin, they said, for example, with regard to usury, they said, because this world doesn't really matter, because even before we're born, I don't know how many Protestants take this seriously, but before we're born, God already knows whether we're going to go to hell or to heaven. And therefore, that's Luther and Calvin. Therefore, There's Darius. I think he's made it. There's Jonathan. Therefore, it doesn't matter what you do in this world. So you can sin, you can do whatever in this world. That's fine. And as a consequence, they said, yeah, usury's fine. We don't care. Because in the kingdom of heaven, in the kingdom of God, there's no usury. There's no interest. There are no bankers. But in this world, it doesn't matter what you do in this world. And whether you go to hell or heaven has already been determined. So it doesn't matter what you do. There's no, everything's pre-written. Everything's known. God knows. So if you're sinning, that's because you were destined to sin. So nothing matters. So there's a sense in which Protestantism, at least in its origin, gave up on virtue, gave up on being a good Christian in that kind of sense that this world is evil and bad anyway, so what the hell? And Catholicism still, tried to live virtuous lives. They try to live by the Christian ethics, and therefore that retarded their ability to embrace capitalism because they didn't want to embrace banking, they didn't want to embrace profits, and they didn't want to embrace self-interest. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
I mean, the flip side of that is, with regard to Latin America specifically, is that up until about 1913, a country like Argentina was just as wealthy as the United States. I mean, it was like 85% or something like that on per capita GDP. And it's really only, at least in the case of Argentina, I don't know about the rest of Latin America, it's only in the 20th century, since 1913, that progress was retarded. And that's when they embraced a variety of different forms of authoritarianism. Now, you can link the authoritarianism to Catholicism to some extent, because I think Catholicism is inherently authoritarian because there's a pope. And with Protestants, you have direct communication with God. In Catholicism, it goes through the pope. So there's an authoritarian already there, so they're more open to authoritarianism. But it's also the case that Latin America, although I don't think this would be the case of Italy and Spain, but it is true that in Latin America, there was a strong influence of continental philosophy. That is, whereas the US and Canada were strongly influenced by Anglo-Saxon philosophy, by the Enlightenment, the Scottish Enlightenment, by thinkers like John Locke and Adam Smith and Hume and people like that, who are healthier philosophically. The South Americans were influenced by Kant, Hegel, Schopenhauer, Marx, and that tradition, kind of a real German tradition. So it's a combination of the religiosity, but also, I think, just the philosophical influences on the different cultures, and why the different philosophies influence different places, partially where the people came from, and partially maybe back to the religion. All right, Jim?
Hello. I some months back, maybe half a year back or so, I found myself studying gold as a currency and ways in which one can hold gold. And I found that there are banks which specialize in allowing people to have gold reserves, essentially private gold reserves. You simply you fund. They set aside however much gold at current market prices and so on and so forth. You're familiar with this. And I was intrigued by the idea. They were proposing the idea that over time one might be able to start paying debts to various institutions denominated directly in gold in the future, that they had some regulatory hoops to get through. But what do you think about this idea of doing an end run around gold-backed currencies using electronic gold, if you will?
Well, I think it's a great idea. I don't see why, and I know companies already do it. I think there's a payment system, and I forget its name right now, that basically everything's denominated in gold. I actually think there's a cryptocurrency out there where they're actually every piece of currency is backed by some gold somewhere in a vault in Switzerland or in London or in Singapore, wherever they happen to have it, and you can trade those. I mean, I don't see what the great advantage is, right? I don't see in the world as it exists right now why, because it's so small and it's dominated by. Now, if Facebook, for example, and I talked about this when I did the show on Libra, if it launched Libra, if it launched a cryptocurrency with Facebook, and if it could get Amazon behind it, if it could get somebody like that, and it was gold backed, let's say, then that could really have an impact, because then you're talking about massive volumes. You would store the gold somewhere. You'd have a gold reserve somewhere. So people would buy the cryptocurrency with dollars, but then the cryptocurrency would be denominated in grams of gold. And then people could exchange that and would have a relatively stable value, although the value of gold vis-a-vis the dollar fluctuates as well. And, and that could change people's attitudes towards gold. It still won't change the fact that the monetary system is dictated by the Federal Reserve and dictated by central banks. That you can't run an end around, but it could theoretically, long-term, become kind of a default currency for a lot of trading and a lot of stuff like that. And maybe then, by example, it would suggest that you don't need a Federal Reserve, you don't need a central bank. Hey, there's a bunch of these private currencies that are working, that are backed by something real and that people are comfortable with trading with, and we don't need dollars and yen and pound sterling and so on. But I don't see any private company doing that. The alternative also is for a country like China to go on a gold standard, or so significant, large economy to go on a gold standard, and again, model by example what could be, and in a sense, that would be the way to replace the dollar as the global currency. If you could, in a way that people believed, convert your currency into gold-backed currency. Let's say if China did it, and people believed that they wouldn't cheat, then you could replace the dollar as the world reserve currency, and that could be significant. But I don't see anybody doing it. I don't see China doing it. I don't see the U.S. doing it. And I don't see the euro going there. Those are the three currencies that could do it. And then I don't see Facebook or Amazon or these guys taking seriously kind of a gold-backed currency.
I don't either. And my sense was what was most intriguing was the idea that somebody had practically solved the problem of how to use gold without carrying gold or having a small vault in your own house or such.
I think that solution is out there. I think if you Google cryptocurrency, gold-backed cryptocurrency, you'll find it. So it's I think they're out there. I think over time, crypto, to the extent that it wants to be a currency, will have to find things to back it, right? Rather than
definitely.
And therefore, I think gold is one. Libra is offering to back the currency with a basket of currencies, of central bank currencies plus bonds, short-term treasuries. So that's another way to back it. You could back it in a number of different ways, and you could have competition between cryptos to do it. The cryptos I don't believe they need to be backed by anything. Like Bitcoin's not backed by anything.
Yeah, not stable.
If it's backed by something, then I think it could be a real real value add to the monetary system and to the reducing transaction costs. All right, good. Jonathan, you're muted. You're muted. I'll unmute you.
All right.
Now you're unmuted.
Thank you for doing this. You're such an inspiration to me, and I know to so many people. So thank you for all you continue to do in terms of advocating for individual rights and the ideas that we all hold so important. One of which, of course, is this country. You've often talked, Yaron, about how you came to this country willingly, embracing its ideas. I want to ask you specifically about nationalism. You wrote about it a little bit in the new textbook of Americanism.
I did.
Talked a little bit about that, but I find myself arguing at odds these days, very oftentimes, with people who claim to be great patriots who love this country, and they think the way to serve it is through a doctrine of nationalism, of anti-globalism and for shutting everyone out, and whether it be not trading or not traveling or whatnot. So how can you kind of make the case that, I don't know, whether it be free trade or open borders is pro-America when the nationalists would say that you're giving jobs to foreigners or whatnot? I guess, how do you make the case that nationalism is un-American when the culture now, even on those on the so-called right, say that nationalism, that's what America's all about?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. And, these days I'm called an anti-American. I hate this country, I'm told. And I see it all over Facebook, unfortunately. But I think the key is to know what America is. So if you consider, as I think many people do, and I think Trump does, if you consider America just another country, that you happen to be born in, and you love the country because you were born there and you like the people and the culture is kind of cool, and it's a beautiful country and it's a big country and it's a rich country, but America is just the geographic lines that define it and the people that happen to be inside. That there's nothing unique about America. There's nothing exceptional about America. There's nothing special about America. Then I think that leads you into this trap of well, if America are these borders and America are the people that happen to be inside the borders, the way to preserve what is America is to build a wall and to not allow new people to come in and to care and to place as a primary your neighbors, the people around you, everybody who is also an American. Now, this also requires kind of a mentality of collectivism. That is that these people are more important than your self-interest, are more important than your life, that your primary responsibility is to them, is to maintaining the state, maintaining these people. That is the primary. And in that sense, these same people believe strongly. I mean, look, Stephen Bannon is a good example. He's now all over Europe trying to sell nationalism in Europe. And the idea there is that, Polish should be Polish and they should, nationalism, borders, and you should take care of your neighbor and you should take care of the people around you. And the French should be French and the Brits, the whole idea of Brexit is not to escape the collectivism and socialism of the European Union. It's to be able to be British. It's to be able to have the borders and keep out foreigners and, take care of your fellow
British jobs.
And maintain British jobs and maintain American jobs, because what America is the people around you, and you want to keep America, you want to keep their jobs. So it's inherently, that attitude is inherently anti-individualistic, anti-individualism. It's a collectivist attitude. And it says that the collective, in this case, the American collective, the British collective, the Polish collective, the French collective, is more important than your life as an individual. And as such, that attitude is, if you have a proper understanding of what America is, anti-American. Because America is not just borders. And in a sense, Europe is. In a sense, Europe is just borders. It's just you happen to have a group of people. Yes, there's French food and there's a certain sense of French culture and so everything. But, there's nothing special about France. There's nothing special about Poland. There's nothing special about Germany. But there's something very, very, very special about America. And that is the rejection of collectivism. America is the only country in human history founded on a moral principle. And that moral principle is individualism, the sanctity of the individual, the fact that one does not sacrifice the individual to the collective, the fact that the collective is not important other than as just a collection of individuals. So that the focus of the American state from the beginning was on the protection of individual rights, the protection of your rights as an individual, not as a collective. So, and then the question is, like trade, is free trade, and let's get away from free trade, right? Because free trade, people think means that everybody trades freely. No, trade without tariffs, okay? So if zero tariff unilaterally good for the individual? And the answer is yes. It's good for me to be able to trade with 7 billion people rather than with just with 300 billion. The economic advantages from trade, the fact that my view about who I trade with should be mine. It's none of anybody's business. The fact that it's my choice, not the government's choice, to tell me All of that is my rights and good for me as an individual. The state has no business in who I trade with and under what terms I trade with people. Unless, again, the people I'm trading with are the enemy, and then we should embargo them. Then we should have nothing to do with them. The same with immigration. I have an individual right to invite people to come and work for me, to come and stay in my house, to come and rent my hotel room. Why is it anybody's business, right? Why is it the government's business? Why is it my neighbor's business? Why is it other people's business? How is me exercising my right violating their rights? It doesn't. So therefore, immigration is in my self-interest, and therefore, immigration is something that the government should protect, that right to immigrate, the right to invite immigrants in. Yeah, Jonathan.
Well, just gonna say, the people on the so-called right laugh when you say sacrifice for the environment, but when you say, oh, sacrifice for the country, oh, well, then of course. So they buy into that altruism of sacrifice to the nation without question. But
but that's common, right? I mean, Christians say sacrifice to our God is great, but those Muslims, they shouldn't be sacrificed to their God, right? Because their God is a false God. Environmentalism is a false God, but America, the collective that is America, is a true God. Now, look, in the year you have to differentiate. Ayn Rand said some positive things about nationalism in a particular context, in the context of foreign policy and the placing of American interests first in foreign policy. Now, I think she was wrong to use the term nationalism in that context. I'm very rarely critical of Ayn Rand, but she shouldn't have used it. But I think she used it in a narrow enough context that she understood what she was doing. 40 years later, a lot of people don't understand what she was doing, and they're using it against her own ideas. But the idea that she had was, and this is where, again, it sounds like Donald Trump, but her idea was you have to place American interests first. But what are America's interests? America's interests are the liberty and freedom, the life and property of individual Americans. So in foreign policy, the criteria should always be the lives and property of American citizens. Is this act going to defend them, or is it going to hurt them? Tariffs hurt them. Going after, I don't know, today, I guess our special forces killed the head of the spiritual and military leader of ISIS. That's good. That probably protects the lives and property of Americans. So that's a good thing. That's the kind of action that the American military action, that the American government should engage with. So, but the standard is not what's good for the Syrians, not what's good for the Kurds in and of themselves, not what's good for Israel, not what's good for any other country, other than what's good for Americans. That is always the context. And in that sense, Ayn Rand is the real America First thinker, and Donald Trump is not an America First thinker. He doesn't know what America is, and he doesn't know what America First would mean. So so nationalism, core nationalism, is wrong. That doesn't mean, now, again, we need to differentiate from patriotism. Doesn't mean you don't love your country, but then again, you have to ask the question, why do you love your country? Now, you can love your country for a variety of different reasons. You can love the language and the food and the songs and the culture and those kind of things. And that's why people who leave certain countries miss those countries, and maybe they miss that culture, they miss the food, they miss that. But that's not what would determine where you live and what you ultimately really love in a country. I mean, I love America because of its ideas, because of the culture that was formed because of those ideas. I love America because of its inherent individualism, and Americans because they're, for the most part, individualistic. That's what I love about America. Is I consider myself an American patriot, and I consider these nationalists anti-American, anti-patriotic, because they're fighting against America. They're fighting against what America represents, what America symbolizes, what America was, and what America could and should be. They're fighting against the founding. I love America for its founding fathers, for its founding principles, for the ideas that made the country great. And I think these nationalists are anti-American. They don't love this country because they don't know this country. And as an immigrant who chose to live here, I think, I've chosen because of certain characteristics. And that's what those characteristics, that individualism, that spirit that is American, is why I'm a patriotic American. But not a nationalist, because I believe individuals should be the primary. That's what America is about. All right, Darius.
Hey there.
Hey, how's it going?
Going well, thank you. Thanks for having me on. It's been too long.
Sure. It's good to see you.
Yeah. Good to see you and the other participants. So, well, let's see. I guess my thing is kind of more of a statement, but I think there's a question in it too. And I'll start by just saying I've been really enjoying the theme you've introduced sometime earlier this year about moral authority. And unfortunately, you've had to introduce it in the context of Elizabeth Warren and more recently this Gretna.
Yeah, and
girl.
AOC. I think I started with AOC too.
Yes,
Yep.
yes. Thank you. So maybe it goes back before this year, and I mean it's such an important theme. And I'll just say, it resonates with me because in my profession, as you and some others know, I'm a financial advisor and I'm the chief investment officer of our wealth management firm. And, I can kind of stand on my head and show people kind of analytical analysis of historical data, but ultimately, you can't, how do you extrapolate that into the future? At some point, you have to stand on your moral authority. Either people kind of take me as having integrity, honesty, objectivity, and want to listen to my advice, or they don't want to.
Yep.
It just really comes down to that at the end. And so, so my question then is, so besides those three who you spoke about, where moral authority has been strong for them, who can you point to on the positive side besides yourself? And if I may add my little anecdote about myself a moment ago, who can you point to on the positive side? Well, really besides objectivists, who can you point to on the positive side that you think does apply this power of moral authority in their approach?
Well, I mean, I think almost all successful bad guys do, right? Because that's how they become successful, and that's how they convince people. In a sense, not all of them, but most of them. They particularly, those who are better, who have an ideology that they're trying to project. So certainly, religious leaders project this moral authority very well. Again, in the service of bad ideas, but do it well, and have throughout history. When I talked about Greta, I talked about Joan of Arc, and Joan of Arc's a good example in history. And people, I think, thought that I viewed Joan of Arc as a positive person, and therefore, when I compared it to Greta, they thought I was talking positively about Greta. And no, I view Joan of Arc as a mystic widow. I mean, she was nuts, right? And Joan of Arc was horrible. And I can't remember enough history to know if there were good guys and bad guys in the war between the English and French. But knowing the English and knowing the French and knowing a bit about that period in European history, my strong suspicion is no, there are no good guys there. They're all bad guys, and who cares who won that war? So I think all of those, Churchill, as a positive example, think of Churchill. Think of kind of the moral authority that he exhibited, the kind of the certainty that we are the good guys, they are the bad guys, we will win. We just need to stay determined, and kind of a confidence, a self-esteem, but a certainty about the virtue of the fight and the value of what they were fighting for. So that would be a good positive example.
What about more contemporary?
I mean, so I'm moving up. I mean, I'd start Reagan to some extent, right? Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall, is certainly an example of a certain, and calling the Soviet Union an evil empire. Now, I think he undercuts himself in other issues, but I think at least in some of his speeches, he certainly exhibit that kind of moral authority, moral certainty, moral courage to stand up to evil. I mean, the sad state of affairs today is there are not many people like that, right? On the good guy's side, right? There's some objectivists, there's some free market people, but I just don't see that many people stand up for good stuff, for good ideas, and using kind of a moral platform to do it on, and so using morality in that way. just trying to think. I mean, business leaders. I mean, it's sad. Imagine if Zuckerberg, I mentioned this the other day, if he stood up in front of Congress and I don't accept your authority to ask me these stupid questions and walked out. That would have been exhibiting kind of moral courage and moral certainty. But he really didn't do that, right? He did the opposite. He cowered before them. I mean, I'm sure in business you see it a lot, right? Your example is a good example. And I'm sure in the context of it, I think Steve Jobs did. Steve Jobs had this ability to say, I stand behind this. And this is going to be good. And I'm certain of it. And he conveyed it with a certain self-esteem and a confidence and everything that I think people bought the product because Steve Jobs said and put his whole persona behind it, and people bought into it. And I think a lot of that was about his moral certainty and in the righteousness of what he was doing. And I think most business leaders, to be very successful in business, have to convey that to their employees, their customers, their clients, to the people around them. You know, we have integrity, we're honest, and we know what we're doing. You know, we're confident in what we're doing. And so, I'm trying to think if there are any other examples out there on the good guy side. I just don't see that much of it. I mean, among intellectuals, you see it. You see people standing up to the statists, standing up to socialists, but just not a huge number. Nobody super influential.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, anybody. I mean, I'm thinking of Jordan Peterson. I mean, Jordan Peterson is very successful, and part of that success comes from his sense of certainty about certain things and sense of, he believes in right or wrong, and he conveys this. Now, I don't agree with him on how you define right or wrong, but some of at least what he says, I mean, he conveys in a way that gives it a certain moral weight.
That comes through when you debate socialists and a lot of these other people is they dither. You actually come out sounding very, very solid.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's right. I think the socialists, particularly, they tend to be, they tend to change their positions. They tend to move because they don't have a solid ground. They don't have a clear idea. There are very few that really get it morally. This is why I think AOC and Greta are unique, because I think they have the ability to frame issues in terms of morality, and not just in terms of, well, this will work better than that. I mean, if my socialist pal, my socialist opponent in my capitalism socialism debate had framed it from a more moral perspective, I think he would have done better, because he would have appealed to the audience altruism, which is already there. And indeed, when he gave them sob stories, when he talked about, people, don't have health care and the poor people, and, that's when he got a positive response. So, the right way is not to talk about, socialism could be successful because of this or that. The right way, if I was a socialist and I was doing this, I would talk about the altruistic duty to help the poor in socialism. Maybe it doesn't work, but it's the right thing to do, and it's the right mechanism by which to do it. So, yeah, I mean, that differentiates the ones who are good at it and the ones who are not so good at it. All right, let's circle back and start with Jennifer.
Okay. I was arguing the other day with someone about, I was saying that slavery and things like that in the past were wrong. And he said, well, you can't judge by today's standards stuff people did back then. But morality is objective. And if no one questioned it at the time, how would you ever get to where you are now?
Yep.
Right. So people have this attitude, but you never would have gotten to where we are if nobody ever said anything.
Yes. And look, knowledge is contextual. So if they really didn't have the knowledge that the slaves were human beings, right, then you could make an argument. They gained the knowledge and then they changed. But they did have the knowledge. And the knowledge existed. And there were anti-slavery advocates among the founding fathers. And there were people making the argument against slavery at the time. This wasn't something that was completely mysterious. And indeed, slavery had been a part of human life forever. And the argument was never slaves are subhuman. The argument was, who cares? They lost the war. They're my slaves, right? I captured them. They're my slaves. But suddenly, in the 18th century, there's this concept of individual rights. And that doesn't work anymore. That idea that, hey, they have rights. And Locke articulates that. And our founders are taking these ideas seriously. And in a sense, you have to say they didn't really have an excuse. Now, they make arguments about if we freed all the slaves today, they would be worse off or stuff like that. But one gets a real sense that those are rationalizations. Those are
And
not.
there were a lot of laws designed to protect the rights of slaves before they emancipated them.
Yes. So, they could have protected them. They could have done things to protect them. But I think they're more rationalizations than anything else. So I do think you have to judge the founders. You have to judge them within the context of the time. Yes. We couldn't have had a United States probably if they had fought over this. There would have been, the colonies would have splintered, and it's not clear that we would have gained independence from the British. So it's a compromise that maybe they had to make, but it would have been nice if they had been more assertive in clearly stating that this was a compromise they were opposed to. And so I think one does and should judge them, but also in the context, judge them given the time and judge them also given their achievements. That is, yes, this was wrong, but, they did set in motion everything that ultimately led to slavery, going away. So it's, yeah.
Wasn't there even Greeks that wrote against slavery way back then?
Probably.
Too?
I don't know, but
I
probably.
think there were.
Yeah. Yeah, no. But certainly by the time of John Locke, there's an understanding of individual as an individual. And indeed, the idea of enslaving white people, it doesn't exist anymore, right? And now it's just blacks. Now it's just the other. But it didn't, the idea of individual rights wasn't fully understood and didn't fully integrate. And women, they treated women the same way, right? Women didn't have rights in the sense that men had rights, didn't have right to property, for example. So right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, and property and pursuit of happiness it was all men created equal, and it wasn't women, and it was men, white men, and Aristotle had that view of women. Aristotle had an awful view of women. So, but I think by that point in time, they probably could have done better. And one should evaluate that, and one should judge that, and one should make judgment. It doesn't mean that eliminates or that wipes out their achievements and all the good that they did.
Right. I was just trying to point out how you get from there to here. Someone has to stand up and with a different idea and challenge it.
Yeah, vision.
Some of the founders already did, and it evolves, and then you've got this incredibly courageous movement, which was the abolitionist movement. That was unbelievably courageous because they faced horrific odds, and they fought for individual rights, for freedom, and they were successful. Reading about that is truly inspiring because the odds that they faced were truly horrific. All right, Jim.
Quick little side note before a broad question. First, I want to say I admire how you debate with your face. What I mean by that is I love watching whenever you get into a debate with someone or Q&A session, I watch your face. I watch how you respond without saying a word. Keep doing that. That's just beautiful. The question, it's a bit of an amorphous question, but sorry about the people in the background. I really had a sense, obviously, Ayn Rand must have known when her time was limited, and it would have been obvious by then that she was not going to see the ideal world that she hoped for. And the more time goes by, the more I think, and you've commented on this before more than a few times, in some of your presentations, we're probably not going to see an objectivist world in our lifetimes, perhaps. Now, I'm actually an optimist in the sense that I think you're right. I think it will happen, but the groundwork is not laid yet. Do you find yourself thinking in terms of, as odd as this sounds, a 100-year plan for objectivism, or some long-term plan like that, where again we set the groundwork now, but we expect this to be a generational battle?
Yes, I do think in terms of 100-year plans. I mean, I think you have to, if you're running, when you're running an institution that that is responsible for preserving her philosophy and for spreading it and educating people about it and teaching people about it, you have to think in those terms, because you have to think about what's it actually going to take. And if you think about what's it actually going to take, then it's obvious it's not going to take a few decades. It's obviously not going to take short term. So what are we going to have to do today so that over the next 100 years, things comes about? And to do that, you have to kind of understand you have to understand how cultures change over long periods of time, and the role of the ideas in history, and how ideas influence cultures, and how ideas influence society. So I don't think you have a choice but to have a multi-year or multi-decade plan. I mean, that's always been my attitude. I mean, I'm not involved anymore in planning at the Institute. But when I try to think about this, and when I, did planning in the past, that's how we tried it. It's hard to do that kind of planning. It's certainly hard to convince donors to fund that kind of planning. And it's hard to get people excited about that kind of planning, because all you're doing is sowing seeds now for something great that'll happen beyond our lifetime. And it's very, very hard to get people inspired by that. But my outline is pretty simple. I mean, my view is it's intellectuals who change the world. That's just a fact of reality in every realm. It's the intellectuals who've changed things, and it's not just the intellectual starts. It's all the intellectuals who take those ideas seriously and then manifest those ideas in every field, from education to science to philosophy to economics to sociology, to every single intellectual field, to journalism, and then convince, in a sense, the culture without the culture even knowing that the ideas originate with Kant or originate with some environmentalist wacko or something else, that these ideas are true and make sense. And then you get the political change. So it starts with a bunch of intellectuals, and they slowly take over, and they slowly convince other intellectuals, and ultimately they convince people of a certain set of ideas, and then those ideas manifest. So
That's
then
become almost part of an American and certainly conservative mythology that the media and politicians are in charge of it. But I think Ayn Rand was completely right. Philosophers are the tip of the spear.
Well, philosophers, and then the people who apply that philosophy, people intellectually apply that philosophy. So because we've already got the philosopher, which was Ayn Rand, and then other philosophers who are articulating the philosophy, but then you need people who then apply it in a variety of different areas. And I think in DIM, Leonard mentions you have to have it being applied, not explicitly, not saying this is the objectivist view of physics, but the objectivist view needs to be applied into physics, and there need to be achievements where the achievements are then looked back on and say, look, the objectivist epistemology was crucial to getting these achievements done in physics, and the same in education, and the same in art, and the same in all these other realms. And then you will get the change. So the key, I think, from the perspective of planning for that, is how do you get to the point where there are thousands of objectivist intellectuals one day? And I think there it's an issue of two things. One is you have to expose lots of people to Ayn Rand, because you don't know which among them will become an intellectual. And you need to give them a path. You need to show them a path where they can learn these ideas. And then a small group of them who take these ideas seriously, follow this path, will become intellectuals. And that needs to just continuously feed on itself. The intellectuals then help expand the knowledge of Ayn Rand's ideas, and then people, see this path to study it deeper. More intellectuals get created, and you get this cycling in and you get this constant cycling where the group of intellectuals and therefore the group of people exposed to the ideas is constantly growing. And I think that's what we need. I think that's what we've been doing for the last 20 years with greater or with more or less success. That's what we've been trying to do over the last 20 years at the Ayn Rand Institute. But it's hard to measure results and it's hard to see progress, and it's frustrating. It's frustrating for a lot of people to see that, but that's the kind of plan. And a plan like that requires ultimately thousands of intellectuals. And to get to thousands of intellectuals, when you're starting with just a few dozen, it's not easy. So today we have in our intellectual network, I think AOI has, I don't know, 200 to 300 intellectuals. Well, okay. And then in 10 years, maybe that'll be 1,000. And then in 20, 30, 40 years, maybe that's a few thousand. And then you'll start talking about really changing the culture. But before you have that, it's not going to happen.
Well, I certainly admire your dedication to it, because I know a lot of it is making the same burger over and over. And it's got to be frustrating, especially when you see a lot of the people who maybe frustrate you in the comments and such.
Oh, yeah.
It's kind of important to some degree, ignore them.
Yep. It is hard. It is hard, and it's disappointing because you don't expect these kind of people to be there after all the work we've done to clarify what objectivism means and what nationalism means and all these things. It's frustrating that the false views of these ideas are still out there in spite of all the work we do to clarify what these concepts are actually there.
And those of us who get it aren't always the loud ones.
No, certainly not. Certainly not. All right, Jonathan. Oh, you're muted. You've been muted from the beginning. Muted. Muted, still muted, still muted. Jonathan.
How about now?
There we go. Finally.
Thank you, Yaron. You made the point a couple weeks ago on a show that, and this dovetails a bit on what Jim had said, that whenever you read something by Rand, you get inspired, you pick up an old book and an old essay. And I'm very much the same way. And and you've talked as well, Yaron, about how when you were just learning about objectivism, there wasn't a lot of material out there. And, there's such a huge body of material out there right now. I mean, I picked off The Objectivist, Ayn Rand's old publication from years back. And there's so many gems in here, and this kind of dovetails a bit of what Jim mentioned, is that so many of the objections, Yaron, I hear you address, whether on Facebook or in your public speeches, were addressed in these publications 20 and 30 years ago. Even on the super chat here today, someone's saying, well, wasn't Ayn Rand a fan of a serial killer? And there must be just a bit of a Groundhog Day for you. So I guess this isn't a question, it's more of a comment that, look, I've always said I'm a student of objectivism. Even after 20 something years, I'm learning about objectivism. And why don't people do a little research and learn before kind of opening up their mouths and opining? Because the material is out there. There's tremendous amount of material out there. And I feel like you must feel like you answer the same questions over and over and over again.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. But on the other hand, that's what teachers do, right? You teach the same class over and over and over again. It's just new students. And that's what we do. Then, I mean, the nice thing about what I do is I get to change the topics. Now, yes, you always go down to the same basic foundations, but I get to criticize Greta one day and get AOC the other day and Trump another day and national conservatism another day. But so I'm a teacher, so repetition is not new to me. And I managed to keep it fresh so that it doesn't get boring. But what's frustrating is, and this is what's frustrating to me, is the number of people who attended class and who don't get it, right? That's what's frustrating. Now I keep doing it because I know there's a big group of people who do get it, and C, there's a big group who still hasn't heard it. So that's what keeps me going. I mean, if you look at the chat or if you look at the other places, there's always new people, and there's always people who get it and are defending the right position. So those are the people I'm talking to. The people who I've talked to already and haven't gotten it yet, or read Ayn Rand and don't get it, they're certainly not going to get it from hearing it me say it the 17th time. Why they listen to me is beyond me. Why they inflict that on themselves, given that they're hostile to everything that I say and they refuse to learn anything. But from my perspective, I'm having fun as long as I am convinced that there are people who are listening and whose lives I can impact.
And the people who are wrong give you teachable moments.
Yes, or they also give me frustration. So that, I think you all hear it sometimes in my voice. So it's teachable moments and it's frustration because sometimes the stupidity goes beyond what's teachable. All right.
Thanks for doing what you do.
Thanks, Jonathan. Darius.
Yeah. So, yeah, just on a social note, I just remembered I did actually recently bump into a few weeks ago at the ARI Gala. And that was nice.
That's right, in New York, just for like 3 seconds. Yeah.
Yeah, and also on the social note, if I can just add, we're having Tal Safani join us at our next Los Angeles Objectivist Club meeting in a few weeks. Yeah, so any Los Angeles Objectivists, if you're not in touch with me already, please connect, and hopefully you can join us.
So how do they connect? How do they connect?
Yeah, I think probably the easiest thing is search for Los Angeles Objectivists on Facebook, and you can join the Facebook group page. And then from there, I can add you to our email list, and we can go one-on-one from there.
Perfect. Right. Any questions? Anything you want me to talk about?
Just real quick, I'll just say, since I am another investment professional here on the call, on this topic of gold, it strikes me how many objectivists make gold sort of a really kind of central feature in their investment thinking. And my thoughts around gold are a lot like the way you've described charity in the past, which I completely agree with, which is it might have some benefit, but it's really a marginal issue, a kind of a side issue. If anyone has not read Warren Buffett's 2011 letter to shareholders on gold, as soon as this is over, I recommend you go do that. Yeah. And tell me if you still think gold is anything more than a side issue after reading that.
I think there are two issues here, right? I agree with you completely in terms of investments. I don't think gold's an investment. Gold is a way to preserve the purchasing power of the dollar, but there are lots of ways to do that. You can buy inflation-adjusted bonds. You can buy a variety of different things that give you inflation protection if that's what you want. I think where gold is most significant is as an alternative monetary system. That is, as a rejection of the current monetary system, which I think is a centrally planned monetary system and is a fraud. I think having a Federal Reserve is a fraud. It's committing fraud on the American people, and it's central planning. It doesn't work. It's a disaster, and it can only causes distortions and perversions in our economy. So, but my view is not that the alternative to that is a gold standard. My view is the alternative to that is free banking, where whatever standard emerges. Now, I happen to believe that gold will emerge as the standard because I think it has in history. And I think the objective reasons why it emerged in history, and I think it will be the standard in the future. But the key is to have competition over currencies. The key is to have private banks issuing currencies and then figure out what should be the standard, what will win the competitive battle for the ideal standard. So I think for a lot of people, gold stands in as a proxy for the idea that we should have a competitive monetary system and a private monetary system, a non-government run monetary system.
Right, and one that's hard for government to block too. And that's really why I brought it up, is the high fungibility and the idea that it's easy for a government. Like I think a lot of people don't get this, but a government can say Bitcoin, nope, illegal, and China did.
Well, they can say the same with gold. They did in 1933, right? I mean, gold from 1933 until 1971 or 2, I can't remember, 71 to 73, gold, holding gold in the United States was illegal. It was illegal to have a bar of gold or gold coins or any form of gold that was deemed gold as an investment in a sense, or deemed as in the United States, which is shocking to believe that that was the case, but it was. You know, Nixon made it legal, but also took the U.S. off of gold standard. And I think, you know, it was a bad gold standard. It was a stupid gold standard. Bretton Woods was not a good deal. But by going to purely fiat currencies on a global scale with no anchor, I think has led to much destruction as a consequence. But yes, as an investment, you know, I view gold as an investment as doomsday, as a doomsday thing. And if you view gold as an investment for the day when the dollar is worthless and they're rioting in the streets and you have to, you know, it's post-apocalyptic or whatever, then you better have it in coins and not in bars, because nobody will give you change. And you better have it close to you
with lots of guns.
Not in some foreign bank, and you better have it surrounded by lots of guns. So the only reason to hold gold is, in my view, is if you fear complete societal breakdown, and then you better have guns and you better hold it in small denominations.
Or to speculate on changing value.
Yeah, but then it's just speculation, which almost nobody's good at. Yeah, there he is.
And I generally agree with what you just said, but I would replace the word investment with insurance. I mean, you're holding gold as an insurance, and we insure for what can go wrong. We invest for what can go right. And there is an important difference between the investment mentality and the insurance mentality. Leonard Peikoff says it perfectly in OPAR. Avoiding death is not the same as achieving life.
Yeah, I agree completely. That's a beautiful way to say it. I really like that. I'm gonna use it. I'm gonna take it from you, but I like that. Gold is an insurance, and investment you know, it's not an investment. Investment is very, very different. Investment is about growth. Investment is about production. Investment is about growing. And, you know, and the only way to grow is through production. The only way to grow is through things that increase productivity and increase and generate profits and generate, you know, real production. Whereas gold is static. Gold is insurance. Gold is if things go bad. Yeah, that's perfect. That's perfect. Good. All right, I'm going to do some super chat. I think there are a number here that are pretty quick for me to do, so I can get through a bunch of them, and then we'll come back to this. Here are a few of them. Is Andorra the Hong Kong of Europe? I don't think so. I mean, from what I can tell, Andorra is pretty much like a little village. I've never been to Andorra, so Jonathan, are you smoking in public?
I wasn't going to say anything.
So I think of Andorra as a place where Europeans maybe go to retire. I don't think of Andorra as a place where production gets done, where people go to invest, where people go to produce, where people emigrate in order to get a job, where entrepreneurs go to. I mean, Europe is filled with these little enclaves like Monaco, like Andorra, like to some extent Luxembourg and Liechtenstein. But they're all financial havens, tax havens. They're not production havens. What's beautiful about Hong Kong is people go there to produce, what people go there to create, to make. A little bit like Darius's previous comment, you go to Andorra to, in a sense, protect yourself from the tax man, not to invest. Now, maybe you protect your investments there. I don't know how European laws exactly work. But you go to Andorra to retire. You go to Andorra to live off of your investments. You don't go there to build. And Hong Kong, you go to build. Hong Kong, you go to work. Hong Kong, you're going to do business. That's what drove Hong Kong. That's why Hong Kong has a population of 7.5+ million people. And none of these other little countries in Europe have anything close to that, because they're just not there. They're just not, you know, if you go to Monaco, everybody's rich. Everybody. You know, people who do the service jobs in Monaco live outside of Monaco, because you can't. There's just no way to afford to live in Monaco, because everybody's there who's retired, who's made their money, who's wealthy already, and is living off of income, dividends, you know, their investments, which is great, but it's just a different mentality. It's a different kind of place. All right. Why does the left say Ayn Rand admired a serial killer? What's the story behind it? Why does the left say it? Because they want to, in a quick, easy way, they want to denounce her, and they want you not to take her seriously. And, you know, for you to figure out what was actually said, you would actually have to go and read her journals, and you have to figure out exactly what she meant and how she said it and so on. And it's a lot of work, and it's much easier just to say, well, I mean, she was nuts because she, you know, admired a serial killer. And of course, that's not the story, right? I mean, she called this serial killer, or this killer, a monster. She, you know, she used this story. First of all, she wrote this in her journals for her alone. This was never meant to be published. But she was using the story of the serial killer to attack the culture in which this happened and the attitude of people to it. So one of the things she says is their attitude towards him wasn't moral indignation for the terrible crime he committed. She said it was the mob's murderous desire to revenge its vanity against a man who dared to be alone. So what she saw in him, because he was supposed to be really smart. This killer was really, really smart. And she saw in him the potential of being a great man, and he chose to be a monster. And what she says is it's not, the culture didn't turn on him because of he's a monster, but because of his characteristics that could have, if he chosen differently, could have made him a different human being, a positive human being, an individualistic human being. But you have to read what she actually said about it, and she uses it as a way to evaluate the culture itself, right? And to talk about the attitude of society. But him, she viewed as a monster. She says, yes, he is a monster. That's a direct quote from her journal. And she at least speculates about that part of the cause that drove him to this monstrosity is the state of the culture in which we're in. And you'd have to read her claim. And again, she was young. If this was for publication, she would have never written it like this. It's her jotting down her thoughts as they cross her mind about this issue. But no, Ayn Rand rejected all forms of murder, of immorality, as immoral, as horrific, as evil. And she certainly rejected all, you know, forms of violating another human being's rights as evil and wrong and immoral. So there's nothing to this story, nothing. George, I have not listened to Saint Mortel yet. Sorry, I did find it, but I have not yet listened to it. Thanks for reminding me, and I will listen to it after this show. I'm putting it into my browser as we speak. All right, let's see. When will you discuss the protest in Chile? When I have a chance. I mean, quickly, it's hard to tell exactly what happened in Chile, but it looks like the left in Chile, which is very powerful and very strong, the left in Chile, which has won many of the elections over the last 20 years, it stood up a mob to riot against. They used an excuse of some price changes, and I can't remember exactly what the changes were.
Taxis or something?
Yeah, it was something about public transportation or something like that, which there shouldn't be any public transportation. And they stood them up to go riot in the streets. Now, it's very well likely that the police overreacted and became particularly violent. And now I know today there are 1 million people out in the streets of Santiago. 1 million people is a massive number because the whole population of Chile is somewhere between 5 and 6 million, I think. And so it's a huge percentage of the population. So something I suspect in the way that the government responded to this was probably wrong, that got people who probably didn't agree with the original riots excited about this. But I'd say a lot of this is a consequence of the fact, this goes back to an earlier question. A lot of this is the result of a lack of moral courage and a lack of moral certainty. This is Darius's question. From the Chilean leadership. So Chile has, for a long time, been apologizing for its inequality, apologizing for its own success, apologizing for the brilliant economic performance that it has had. And, you know, I heard a talk by Jose Piñera. Jose Piñera is the brother of the current president and one of the architects, one of the Chilean Chicago boys, who actually brought about the massive changes in Chile under Pinochet. And Jose Piñera talked about the fact that people, successful people in Chile, feel guilty for their success. That this is associated with the guilt for the inequality, guilt for not everybody's rich. And I think that the whole political class in Chile reflects that. And I think to some extent Jose Piñera even buys into this and gives it credence. And as a consequence, even if the people who support the system and would like to see even the system become even more capitalist, even if they think there's a reason to feel guilty about inequality, then that only emboldens the left. It only emboldens the rioters. It only emboldens people to say, well, something must be wrong with the system if even the people who support it, even the people who created it, even the people who benefit from it think there's something wrong with the system. So, and Piñera, who's the brother of Jose Piñera and who's the president right now, has been a complete compromiser. When I was in Santiago, everybody was complaining about the government hasn't done anything. The government was weak. The government was, if anything, turning to the left. It was trying to appease the left. It was doing everything it could to appease the left. Appeasement leads to bigger demands. Appeasement of bigger demands leads to violence. Appeasement of violence leads to a million people out in the streets. And I'm not saying the way to crush the original riots was through more violence. I'm just saying that that is a consequence of a government that has continued to appease and appease and appease and not stand up for the huge achievement that is Chile and what happened in Chile. You know, I mean, the fact is the poor in Chile are far, far, far better off than the poor anywhere else in Latin America because of the relative economic freedom they have. Now, yes, they're poorer than the rich in Chile, but there's a reason for that, you know. And by the way, part of the reason they're not as rich as they should be is because Chile is not as capitalist as it should be. And that's because of their appeasement. All right, why shouldn't the non-aggression principle be applied to animals? Well, let me start by the fact that there is no such thing as a non-aggression principle. Let me say this again. There's no such thing as a non-aggression principle. That is an attempt by libertarians, probably started by Murray Rothbard, to steal an idea of Ayn Rand's and rebrand it as theirs and miss the point Ayn Rand made completely. The principle is not a non-aggression principle. The principle is the principle of individual rights. And it's not that aggressing against one another is bad in and of itself. It's a principle. It's almost an axiom, right? No, there is no such thing. People don't believe this. It's not self-evident. It's not axiomatic in any sense. There is a reason one should respect other people's freedom, because they have rights. Now, why do we have rights? Where do rights come from, you might ask, right? Well, rights are a necessary feature. They're a requirement of human nature if we're to live in a society, if we're to live with other people. Then in order to facilitate human life in a social environment, you need the concept of individual rights. You need the idea of individual rights. Now, the individual rights are what? Individual rights basically say that you are free to pursue your own rational values free of coercion. So individual rights say that you are free to act, to engage in actions in pursuit of your own happiness, in pursuit of the values necessary for your own survival, free of coercion. right? So that's, now, why should we be free of coercion? You have to ask. Why must we be free of coercion? And this will get to why rights don't apply to animals. Well, and you can only ask the why if you've identified this idea of individual rights. If you start with the non-aggression principle, the why just goes away because it's a principle, it's a starting point. And this is not a starting point. So you have to ask the question of why do people need freedom from coercion? Well, then the question is, well, you have to understand the nature of man and his purpose. And the purpose of man is to achieve his happiness, the moral purpose of a man. And how does one achieve your happiness? You achieve your happiness by using your reason, by using your mind. Well, what does the mind require in order to be able to guide us towards our happiness or towards our values? It requires freedom from coercion. Coercion cripples the mind. A gun limits one's ability to think. It makes the mind impotent. So individual rights are rights because they free the mind. They make it possible for us to think, and therefore they make it possible for us to live, to survive. So individual rights are required for human survival because in a social context, they're required for humans to think. So coercion and force are bad, not in and of themselves, which is what the non-initiation principle suggests, but in that they make human thinking impossible, and given that human thinking is a requirement for human survival, it's anti-survival. But if you're a Christian, or if you're a subjectivist, or if you're any other philosophy, why is it bad to force somebody? I mean, if you force them to do what's good, if you force them to achieve a greater good than themselves, if you think they're irrational and you're making their lives better in some way, you have to have a theory of man. You have to have a theory of the nature of man, and then you have to have a theory of morality consistent with that theory of human nature. And only then can you talk about in social interactions, how should we behave towards one another. But libertarianism, by rejecting philosophy, by rejecting morality, by rejecting a human nature, make their own non-initiation principle completely random, subjective, unprovable. All right, I'm going to have to ask the super chat to stop because I'm going to run out of. We're going to spend all day here just going over these questions. All right, great jobs on the short video, thumbnails and editing. All right, that's a thank you to Christian who does all that for me. Seems such suggestions in the chat. We'll try to get to those suggestions. Did you see a Merkava when living in Israel, or is such technology rarely displayed in Israel? Oh, wow. Yeah, of course I saw a Merkava. I mean, I rode in a Merkava. I almost trained on a Merkava.
Can you tell us what that is?
Merkava is a tank. It's an Israeli-made tank. It's the first Israeli-made tank. It was introduced into the Israeli military probably around 1979, 78, 79. It was a very, very advanced weapon system at that time compared to anything else. And it was yeah, I mean, in Israel, you see everything. So weaponry is everywhere. You can't not see a Merkava if you live in Israel, because if you go out of your home, or if you travel out of the cities and you go to anywhere, there are going to be tanks around. And you know, over the last 30 years, there've been a lot of Merkavot out there. I'm not sure what the dominant tank is in Israel today. How does objectivism position itself in regards to comedy? Well, we like it when it's funny. We don't like it when it's not. I think that's all objectivism has to say about comedy. I mean, no, I'm sure objectivism has to say more about comedy in the context of aesthetics. I just don't have to say anything about comedy. I don't know anything about comedy. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I recommend the Chile intellectual Axel Kaiser to those who want to know more about the Chile situation. I agree. Axel Kaiser is really good. When I was in Chile, the organization that entertained me there, that organized my talks, that put everything together, was Axel Kaiser's organization. Unfortunately, I didn't meet him when I was there, although I've met him in the past, because he was out of town. So I dealt with his like number 2 in the organization. But he is the president of the organization that I spoke for in Chile. How do you identify a threat objectively? Well, based on facts. Is something going to hurt you physically? Therefore, it is a threat. Is somebody running at you with a gun? But you have to stop and say, are they running at you with a gun? Or are they just running at some burglar behind you or somebody behind you or something? You have to stop and think and observe and look and evaluate the facts. And you have to, particularly in an emergent situation, you're likely to make mistakes because you're on adrenaline and it's urgent. But you identify a threat by evaluating the evidence around you, by making sure that what you're dealing with a real fact, and then by evaluating whether those facts should lead you to believe that you are in danger, that you are being threatened. I'm sure there's a deeper way of answering that question, but I can't think of it right now. Have you read Peter Bloom's book, Against Empathy? No, I haven't, but I've heard about it. It sounds like a good book, and I'll try to read it, although my list of books I need to read is very long. Is thanking people verbally overemphasized? I don't think so. I mean, when somebody doesn't verbally thank somebody else, and I see it, it kind of irks me. Thanking is just a little act of justice. It's a recognition of something good, something valuable. So I don't think that, I mean, sometimes people, I observed it yesterday, somebody said, thank you, and they said, thank you, and thank you, and thank you, and thank you. Like the bowing in Japan, where you bow, and they bow, and you bow, and they bow, and you don't know when to stop. So something, it becomes a ritual that's ridiculous. But yeah.
Comedy.
Yeah, and then it becomes comedy. I don't think it could be overemphasized. I think justice, the concept of justice, relates to the positive more than it relates to the negative. Saying thank you to something is much more important than saying something negative to somebody when you get bad service. It's more important to observe and recognize good service than it is to observe and recognize bad service. So,
and we do care about how people feel too.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think it's nice to be recognized. It's nice to get that visibility, and I think there's value to both sides in exhibiting that. All right, you guys have any urgent questions you want to ask before we call this a day? Open to anybody?
Looks like Jonathan has his hand up.
Yeah, Jonathan, go for it. But you're muted again.
You have a repeated tweet that you repeat over and over and over again. Can you have that taken off your account?
I don't know how to do that. Do you know how I can do that?
Do you know that you have that though?
Somebody sent it to me and showed me that it appears, but
you're not talking about bond index funds. You've been sending this out for months. So
I know, but it's going on in the background, not me tweeting. I'm not doing anything.
All right, so let's raise some money and get a tech guy on that. We need to raise $1,500 by the end of the show.
Tech guy out there and who knows Twitter, who knows how I can stop this automatic tweet from going out there, please let me know, because I have no idea what the hell is going on.
The objectivist Twitter zombie.
Somebody's asking, why does Yaron have an Israeli accent? Why doesn't Yaron have an Israeli accent?
He kind of does.
I don't. I have no Israeli accent. Okay, George Washington asked, can you grow a beard, Yaron? No, never. I'm not interested in growing a beard. My wife would never kiss me if I grew a beard. So that is like 100% my motivation. And it's powerful, powerful, powerful motivation. So I am not growing a beard. I don't like beards. I wouldn't like a beard on me anyway, but certainly my wife's, if you on the topic, is the dominant one and guides me. Why don't I have an Israeli accent? I don't have an Israeli accent because I grew up with English as my second language at home. So I spoke Hebrew at outside of the house, and I spoke English at home. I actually forgot my Hebrew during a period in my childhood where I lived in England because I spoke English at school and English at home. In those days, I had a Cockney accent. I've changed accents many times over the years. I had a Cockney accent. My parents have reel-to-reel tapes of me speaking Cockney. So if anybody ever wants to really make fun of me, that would be pretty hilarious to play those tapes, which do exist somewhere.
Throwback Thursdays. Let's do it.
There you go. And I then lived in Boston, where I picked up a little bit of a Boston accent, and I think a lot of my swallowing the R's is a Boston thing. But I know many of you think I have a speech impediment or a speech defect. Maybe I do. I don't know. I don't really care. If it bothers you that much, don't listen. If it's that difficult to understand, but I think it's mostly my Boston accent that I picked up in Boston. But I grew up with two languages, English and Hebrew, and my parents are from South Africa, so there's a bit of a South African accent as well. But, in Hebrew, my races are very good. My R's are very good. It's just in English where I swallow the letter, so I have no idea why. And I guess I could train myself not to do it, but I've never been motivated enough to do it. So I know some of you think I sound like Elmer Fudd. Tough. I really, really, really don't care. Of all the insults I get, that's one I don't care about any of them, but that one I certainly don't.
When someone pulls together the fun reel of you with a Cockney accent, they should also put together a fun reel of you doing face debates. I really want to see a collection.
All right, Boaz asked Donald Trump or Elizabeth Warren. The answer is neither. Do you like Woody Allen films? And the answer is some. I like his early work. I like a lot of his early work. I loved in his recent movies. I loved the one set in Paris. What was the one set in Paris? Anybody remember the name? But that was really, really, really good. Great theme, great sense of life. Really, I really, really enjoyed it. I shouldn't say good. I said enjoyed it. Can we have a super chat questions only stream? Sure. But I'll announce it in advance. You can all prepare your super chat questions. All right, everybody. Thank you. Go have a great weekend. I've got work to do, and I'll see you all. I might try to do a show tomorrow. We'll see, either today or Tuesday.
Thanks, Yaron.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Yaron.
Thanks for the support. Thanks for joining me today. Bye.
Bye.